Something I've never been shy about doing is sharing the mistakes I've made on the road with y'all. And today we're going to talk about every mistake I made as a new rider coming into motorcycles in hopes that it'll help you out if you're just now starting out or maybe you haven't even gotten your first motorcycle. There's some things you can take and some lessons that I've learned either the hard way or just through trial and error that maybe you can take with you and you could avoid those errors or know what to look for when some of these situations happen. And to me, it's more important to share the mistakes and take some of the criticism, which is totally fine, but to give you something that will help you as opposed to just, kind of keeping it to myself and, I don't have to share that or delete that one off the hard drive or, kind of skip through that part of the video. But it's so beneficial to see these things, right? None of us are perfect. And while there's a lot of good advice on YouTube right now, there's a lot of people that are way better riders than I am. And you can take their advice and you can trust it. There's also a lot of people out there that are good at editing, right? Or they would never share the mistakes with you because, it's not a fun thing to call your own self out. But I see it as pretty beneficial. So I'm gonna share some of the silly things that you hear about motorcycles. It's one of the few things out there everybody has an opinion on, even if you've never ridden before. Let me know some of the advice that you took that was maybe bad before. Whatever you want to share, leave that down below. Let's go and jump right in. So here's one that I heard quite a bit about when I first started riding, and that was the brakes. Nobody really has an opinion when it comes to cars and trucks and how you brake, right? Come to a smooth stop, boom, you're good to go. When it comes to motorcycles though, right, you have two brakes. And so people have very strong opinions. Like some people say, don't use the front brake at all, while others say they never use the rear brake. When in reality, yes, the majority of your stopping power is going to come from the front brake and you should absolutely use it. You also don't want to stab at it. So basically a motorcycle, it can be a very simple concept if you just keep this in mind. A motorcycle can handle a lot, but it doesn't want to handle pretty much anything super abruptly. So you can squeeze hard on those brakes pretty much all day long, not have an issue. Even if you have ABS, the chances of getting to that point could be slim to none. Maybe you never get to that point where the ABS kicks in. But if you stab the brake, if you grab that front brake in an emergency situation or whatever, then that's where you might start to see some issues. Now, the other thing you'll hear is, oh, well, you should never use a front brake in a corner. Well, keep in mind, trail braking is one of those kind of vital techniques that I've just learned over the past couple of years. I've talked about this before, where you essentially are leading into a corner very lightly on those front brakes, and it gives you time to react, not overreact, if you see something in a corner, if there's an animal, if there's sand, if there's gravel, etc. If you're going wide in that corner, it gives you a lot of control to steer into the corner. But man, I heard don't ever touch the front brake in a corner. And that's true. When you're in the corner, you should never be grabbing at that front brake. You should never really grab at it anyways, or stab at it if you will. The point is though, to say you should never do something indicates that, oh, if you touch that front brake in a corner, you're heading for trouble. So you know what I would do is I would actually use the rear brake in the corner. But that doesn't help the compression in your forks. It doesn't increase the contact patch in the tire. You're leading in kind of hoping that you made the right adjustments when it comes to speed and stuff, but what if you didn't? Now you're jamming on that rear brake. And if you think that can't cause you problems in a corner, you're sadly mistaken. So now you've put yourself in a position where you're not trailing on or off that front brake. You're like, what the heck do I do? I'm running wide. Now that leads to panic situations. The point is, there's a time and a place for all of this stuff. And it kind of leads me into my second thing, which is absolutely, if you're going to invest money in a motorcycle, in the gear, and all this kind of stuff, the insurance, whatever, maintenance, you need to be investing in yourself first. Take a class from somebody that actually knows, right? If you're taking advice from somebody that's been riding a motorcycle for 50 years, but they can't do a U-turn outside of, 40 or 50 feet, that should be a red flag. If they tell you that they've been in 10 accidents throughout their lifetime and just ride fast and never use the front brake and something doesn't seem right, just because they've spent a lot of time riding a motorcycle doesn't mean they know how. So it doesn't have to be this thing, well, you don't know what you're talking about, so, I'm not going to listen to you. But, what I would certainly do is at least take an MSF, at least do the Riding Academy. Better yet, go to somebody, Robert Simmons or, Jerry Palladino, any one of these guys that actually know what they're doing. So that way you know what you're doing. It's not as simple as just jumping in a car and, learn to steer and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot more to it. And so they can kind of point out some of the things that you've probably already picked up that could be wrong. You can correct them before they become a habit, and maybe even further down the line become a liability to yourself and, God forbid, a passenger. When you're doing this, though, it's not like, oh, you do it one time, you're good to go, right? You constantly have to be learning, even if it's just a couple of times a week or however often that you ride. You definitely want to be practicing this stuff just regularly, right? You don't have to make 10, 12 hours a week out of it. The more the better, of course, but the faster you want to get better, the more you're going to do it, of course. But it is kind of a constant thing where you're always learning. I equate it to like bass fishing, right? I really love bass fishing, but I've never really taken the time to look at weather patterns and, different baits at different depths and all this kind of stuff. So that's something I'm learning now, and I'm realizing, holy crap, I really didn't know anything about bass behavior and fishing, and it's just like a constant learning thing, right? Same thing with motorcycles. And while we can draw some comparison between bass fishing and motorcycles, the things you catch when you're on a motorcycle could stick around with you a heck of a lot longer than a bass ever will, so just keep that in mind. Here's one I got away with probably a lot longer than what I should have, and that is checking tire pressure. Do you know that 5 to 6 pounds of loss in tire pressure on your motorcycle, according to some, can lead to like 25 to 30% less traction? And so when I was looking up some like statistics through the highway department, they say that about 3% of motorcycle crashes are caused by tire issues. I thought it would actually be a heck of a lot more than that. But if the fact that you lose grip doesn't make you nervous, maybe the money it can cost you certainly will, because it can also cut your tire life by up to a third or more, depending on how low you run those tires, how often you do it as well. So there's also a money aspect to it. And look, tire gauges and pumps, they're super cheap in the big scheme of things. Even if you spend $100, which is like an expensive one, at least in my world, that is worth its weight in gold. And I've noticed that with motorcycles specifically, they really fluctuate a lot more than what you might find on your car or your truck or whatever. So it may have just been, maybe a month, right, since you rode last. But you could have had, hotter days or colder days or transition times like what we're going through right now and this time of year from summer into fall, and you have some more chillier nights and that tire pressure really starts to tank. The point is, you only got 2 of them. And in order to take care of them and to get the maximum longevity out of those tires and make sure you have maximum grip, keep a tire gauge on you, keep a pump on you. Tire repair kit would be even better if you have a way to store it. And then that way, if something happens on the road, you're prepared. But up until that point, you know that you're maintaining your tires and they're in good condition. Here's one that's actually pretty sobering, and that is the fact that your first 6 months are probably going to be your most dangerous. And for a lot of people, the times when they ride the most, because you fall in love with it. You're like, man, this is awesome. I can't believe I went this long without riding or whatever. I know I was like this, man. I was so gung-ho about it. I wanted to ride all the time. The bike was a different story. Man, we'll get around to that. But so maybe the first month or two, you're like really cautious. You're taking in all this training. You're practicing. You're doing all this kind of stuff. And then you're like, man, I got this whole bike thing figured out. Then you start pushing it. So, they've done studies, man, that show like your speed increases after 3 or 4 months of riding, right? By like 20% or something like that. I don't know how they found that out, but whatever. According to the Hurt Report, they found that, within 6 months, that is the most likely time that you're going to have an accident. And they found that upwards of 50% of people that are in motorcycle crashes have been riding for 5 months or less. Your confidence starts to build way quicker, typically, than your skill. But it's almost like a perceived skill, right? Just because you've gone a long time without an accident doesn't equate to skill. There's a lot of people that have been riding a long time, kind of like what I alluded to in the beginning, that are still dragging their feet around, and they've been riding for 50 years, right? So time in the saddle doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I'm getting better. It just seems like you're getting better because you haven't had an accident. So you're like, oh, I got this whole thing figured out. I'm good to go. What's everybody talking about? And then you make a mistake that could have possibly been avoided if you would have gone through some kind of training. Trust me when I say you're not unique in thinking that, you've got this whole thing figured out because you went 6, 7 months, a year without crashing and you're just one of the best riders out there. It is a false sense of security to think that you're just somehow just really naturally good on a bike, because all of your instincts, your natural instincts anyways, are almost always wrong on a motorcycle. Trust me, there's a lot of things, especially when it comes to like slow speed handling, that you need to learn and ingrain, and emergency braking, all this kind of stuff. There's a lot there that you need to learn and take in, and never kind of get to the point, and I say never, look, I was there. That's why I'm telling you some of the biggest mistakes I made. I thought I had this whole thing figured out. So don't take this as, oh man, you think you're perfect. Absolutely not. But I know how easy it is to get into that mindset and think you've got everything figured out, because now maybe you can do a U-turn and you haven't had a crash, and you're like, easy. When in reality, the only truly 100% foolproof way to get better on a motorcycle is to humble yourself and go to somebody that knows way better than you do and learn from them and practice. Now here's one I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on because I've talked about it before, but that is upgrading or buying too much motorcycle right off the rip. You get around some friends, you see what they're riding, and that's kind of a natural progression to kind of go, the way of your friends. There's no harm in that, but only once you've mastered your beginner motorcycle should you consider ever upgrading. Now that's easier said than done. And again, I've made this mistake before. Actually, twice I've made this mistake. And it's something that you can overcome. So that's why, it may not bite people as much or as often as you may think, but it's going to make your learning experience probably a lot longer, right? With a heavier motorcycle, it's going to be more stable on the road. You might be able to travel a little bit longer, be a little bit more comfortable, store all your stuff. There's a lot of great benefits to having a big motorcycle. I love big, heavyweight Harley Davidsons and Indians for that reason. But when it comes to slow speed stuff, right, you have a lot more weight. So it kind of gets into your head a little bit when you're depending solely on the clutch, the rear brake, your little bit of throttle there, and you're trying to make a 20 or a 22 foot U-turn, right? It can make that process a lot harder, take you a lot longer too. But it's nothing you can't overcome. What you want to consider though is the bigger the bike, the bigger the engine, the less forgiving. It's really as simple as that. So the mistakes you make on a smaller motorcycle are going to be exaggerated, probably tenfold on a bigger bike. And it's just that simple. So learning and mastering that smaller motorcycle for that short, temporary amount of time is probably going to make your riding career that much easier, that much smoother, and honestly that much safer all the way until the day you quit riding. And it's going to make the transition from bike to bike to bike just that much better for you. Now here's one I am for sure a hypocrite on, because I still continue to do it to this day. If you're anything like me, man, motorcycle crash videos, they come up in the algorithm from time to time, and I enjoy watching them as much as anybody else. Of course, hoping that, our fellow riders are safe in the process, but, all the gear all the time. This is one you should follow, right? It's almost like what you tell your kids, do as I say, not as I do. I hate being hot. I live down here in the South. I know a lot of y'all do as well. And 90, 95 degrees, it's 110, 115 with the heat index. And wearing a helmet is almost enough to make you pass out. Then you add on gloves and a leather jacket or padded jacket and enforced jeans and boots and all that kind of stuff. It's an easy trap to fall into. So What I'll say is you should all the gear all the time. That's good advice, okay? You only got to watch a few crash videos to understand, man, that would really suck if that was me right now. But you also got to understand if you're not going to do that, every layer you remove is extra risk you're adding on to that slide if you end up taking one. So just keep that in mind. I have a very bare minimum of things that I have to have though. Helmet, gloves especially. We do everything with our hands. Gotta protect them. Helmet, of course. You can't do much without your noggin. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Then I start to lighten up a little bit. I'm almost always wearing boots, but they're not like rider, kind of reinforced boots in certain areas and all that kind of stuff. And then, jeans, Teflon jeans or reinforced jeans, right? Abrasion resistance. Those things are nice. They're expensive. I don't ever really think about it. Buying jeans for me, because I'm kind of short, I always feel like I got to try them on first so I don't ever order these things, right? Whatever. Maybe it's just laziness at the end of the day. It's a good idea to do that. But again, wearing a jacket, I've tried a number of different things. During the summertime, to stay cool on a motorcycle, I've even looked at air conditioning helmets. So, I've explored some options. I still would like to try an air conditioning helmet because I think that'd be pretty cool. And I'd just like to see how it works. Point is, all the gear, all the time, is the best way to do it. If you don't, though, you're just adding more layers of risk and potentially less layers of your skin. Here's another one, and man, I learned this the hard way within, I think it was 2 days of buying my first bike after I had taken a period of 10 years off. My first bike coming back was a 2017 Iron 883. And, I can remember kind of how to work the controls, but I wasn't super confident, right? I had lost all those years, never ridden a motorcycle, right? So anyways, I wait until a Saturday morning to go into work because, the traffic's lighter and all that kind of stuff. Well, the Saturday I picked, there was some rain in the area, but it was real spotty. And so I did check the weather, 3 or 4 times, but I was like, I don't need a rain jacket. I don't even think I had a rain jacket at the time, so even if I thought that was a good idea, I didn't have one to put on. Well, I get down a 2-lane road that's just notorious for crashes and head-on collisions and all this kind of stuff. And I run into one of the worst thunderstorms I've ever been in. I wish I was recording this at that time. But it was one of the, it was an absolute nightmare. I had this dump truck behind me that I'll never forget because instead of trying to pass me, I was going like 35 miles an hour on a 55 mile per hour road. They were just very cool. They kept their distance. They took their time. They didn't try anything crazy. You won't always get that, which is probably why I remember whoever was driving that dump truck, right? If you ever seen a guy in pretty much, all black with a Harley jacket on, clenching the bars like crazy in the middle of a thunderstorm on one of the back roads in Charleston, well, that was me. And, I can remember the rain was so bad, and I tell people this, maybe they think I'm lying, I'm not. I had this like protective type of thing on my glasses. I forget, maybe it was like the anti-reflective or whatever it was. Well, the rain had etched itself into those glasses because I had to pop my visor open because it was just fogging up constantly. So I get to work and I'm late, which isn't anything abnormal for me, to be totally honest with you, but later than usual. And I have like an inch or 2 inches of water in each one of my boots, soaked from head to toe. And Miss Heckshot couldn't bring me a change of clothes until about 2 o'clock that afternoon. Keep in mind, I had gotten soaked at 7:30 in the morning, something like that. And I was scared to death of this rain. So the moral of the story is, be prepared for the weather, don't be scared of it. And that little bit of inconvenience that you're going to have from overpacking and over-preparing far outweighs the worry, the anxiety, and having a trip ruined because you're walking around soaking wet all day. Now, the last one I was going to include, the classic, had to layer down, but it's kind of generic, and you guys have probably already heard that, before. So I decided to replace that one with curvy roads. Now, you may have grown up in the mountains. You may live in the mountains. It may not be anything to you. Me, I haven't. And so living in a really flat area pretty much my entire life, I have this kind of attraction to mountain curvy roads. But I also have reservations about them, especially before I rode like the Tail of the Dragon. Now, my first curvy road ever was the Rattler. And I was nervous about it. I was nervous about the Tail, right? You know, you hear all of these horror stories. But when I rode the Tail, it was actually a few months after I'd learned the concept and had been practicing trail braking. And that really helped out a lot. But what you don't want to do is, if you're not used to curvy roads and line positioning and decreasing radius, and get somebody that knows these roads, that isn't in a rush, that's going to kind of show you and can teach you these things, and start on something easier. You don't have to start out on the Tail of the Dragon, although I found that road pretty enjoyable, to be honest with you. But you can start with nice sweeping corners and things like that, which, you know, I find enjoyable anyways. Sometimes more enjoyable than the super curvy roads, like Iron Mountain Road, right? That's a fantastic road. You get almost anything on that road. Unfortunately, it was raining the first and only time that I've been down it so far, but it was a fantastic experience. When the rain hit, though, again, it's kind of easy for me to say, don't lose confidence in your tires. But you can lose confidence in those tires. It can make it a little bit more stressful when that's all you're thinking about. So when it comes to curvy roads, if you're not used to them, start out on something small, work your way up. There's no harm in that. And find somebody that is willing to take the time with you and is not trying to rush you through these things, because that's where accidents can happen. One last thing, just kind of like a bonus, and I've done this before and I don't know why I continue to do it, is sometimes when I go out riding, I don't treat it like a normal trip. So meaning I may not eat very well, or maybe I don't eat anything at all. You know, a quick way to break my concentration and sometimes break my mood entirely is if I'm hungry, I'm tired, things like that, getting plenty of rest before a long ride, getting stuff to eat before you go out, man, it can make all of the difference in your trips. So there you go. There's every mistake, well, almost every mistake that I made. I probably could come up with a part 2. If you guys like this video idea, maybe I will do just that. Love to hear from you guys, man. What's like the biggest mistake you made when you first started riding? Again, this is for us all to kind of learn from each other. And if I got to put myself out there to do that, and just one of you picks up any one of these things and says, man, I never thought about that, then it was all worth it. Love to hear from you guys down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.